Jason Rockman here, spokesperson for Montreal Comiccon. I'm here with Melinda Clarke. We've chatted before.
Yes.
You're a fan favorite, and
really?
we love having
That's
you.
good to know.
We love having you at our shows because
Thank you.
everyone that meets you says the same thing. She's awesome and she's so welcoming. How do you keep that spirit when you do these shows? Because it's got to be draining at one point because you do give a lot of yourself when you're meeting somebody.
I will admit that when I was a little bit, about a decade ago, they started ramping up how many shows, I think, or correct me if I'm wrong, it was about 15 years ago with shows. And I've done a few more as the years have gone on. And I think it's kind of a direct, I don't know, I guess if you're not enjoying it, I think you need to check yourself, not the environment around you.
100%.
Because it's, what I think is fascinating and... First of all, it's become a part of our industry.
Right.
I think more and more people this year probably are doing it more or maybe doing it for the first time.
Right.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
And I just think it's fascinating to me. And also, let me go back.
Yep.
I did a podcast, a rewatch podcast with Rachel Bilson during the pandemic about the OC, the Welcome to the OC bitches. And one of the things that I learned from it, because I'd never done that, but I just learned it was really interesting to connect with people I'd worked with, or then talk to people I'd never spoken with, to get their stories, to get their narratives of their experience, because clearly they had a different experience than I did.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I like to connect with people, if they come up to me and say, I liked you on this show or that film or this thing, I ask them why.
Yeah, right.
Tell me about your experience. And oftentimes it's, I was 15 and it was the first zombie I'd ever seen, or I hated you in the OC because you were so mean to Marissa, but now as an adult, I understand what you were doing.
Of course.
And sometimes the exploring on the podcast the cultural impact of what a show like the OC did, or how it may have formed. People have told me, I saw this horror film you did when I was 6 years old. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But it kind of led me on a path to liking horror. So I think everyone's individual story is interesting to me. And that's why I like to connect with people 100%. And have them tell their stories.
So at the root of it, you're a people person. Because some people just aren't, and you are, and I think it comes across when people meet you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I think it's one of the reasons we do what we do as actors. We're connecting. And it's a collaborative process on set with 100 people trying to get through the day, and we're not. Of course, islands doing this. We're not. I'm not the director, producer, cinematographer. We each do our own thing, and then there's a product that gets put out. And then, so this is, we don't get that automatic, tangible experience of an audience clapping in theater.
Yeah, of course.
So this is the result of that, and it's just it's I don't know, for lack of better words, it's validation and reward at 30 years later, 20 years later.
Andrew McCarthy just put out a really, really good documentary.
I'm in the middle of it.
Yeah, so it's called Brats.
Yes.
It just made me think of that when you were talking about doing a podcast with some of your cast members from the OC, because it seems like it's therapeutic to go back, especially when you're younger and you're an artist and you're insecure, and to be able to meet somebody 30 years later, 20 years later, and go, that was just me, and I actually liked you. Have you had moments like that on the podcast?
So that was one of the actual, if somebody said, what was the result of doing it? For me, it was great to reconnect with people, obviously, but there were quite a few people, not only the creator, Josh Schwartz, Tate Donovan, we got to talk to the entire cast, and I'm really appreciative that everyone wanted to do it. I don't think everyone wanted to talk about it because it was a painful experience for some of them, or not necessarily the whole thing, but it was, I think I didn't realize how difficult it was. And I think, Tate and specifically Josh Schwartz said it was very therapeutic to be able to go back, because I had no idea that Josh and Stephanie Savage, the creators of the show, felt that there was failure at the end of the show. And because they didn't get to 100, because some of the cast were very unhappy that some of the choices they'd made in the show weren't as successful as they wanted. But to see how it's still celebrated,
Yeah.
regardless. And, I think it's just a euphemism for life. There's no such thing as perfection.
No.
And certain episodes and seasons were better.
Yeah, of course.
And I realized when I left the show in 2007, in my mind, I always thought, what happened?
Yeah.
And I think those stories are why we still talk about things.
For
And
sure.
if you're a fan of the OC, they put out an oral history book that answered a lot of questions for me.
Okay.
Because I always wanted to know what was behind the scenes at the network and the
Yeah.
producers and what was going on. And it really, I've been talking about it for a few years now, and I'm still doing a little podcast because the fans wanted some more. But I think at some point I might, gently not talk about it on a podcast as much.
Sure,
right?
of course.
But yeah, no, I just find the stories interesting. Like what else? Don't you think that the pandemic shifted? Like we had to focus on things even if we had monotonous days where we couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
And this kind of nostalgia became super comforting.
Oh yeah, well yeah. Everyone dug through their attics and looked through their boxes and memory, but they had time.
Yeah.
So it's almost having a pause sometimes to have time can
The
be a positive.
chaos quieted down.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
You're here all weekend. We're really excited to have you here. So make sure you come check out Melinda Clarke at Montreal Comiccon.